Today is August 30th, 1993. This is going to be an interview with Mrs. Donald Berrie. My name is Matt McCauley, the interviewer of the Kirkland History Project, right for the Kirkland Courier. Also present today, in addition to Mrs. Berrie, is her husband, Mr. Donald Berrie. And we are beginning this interview at about 1:30 in the afternoon here at the Berrie home in Juanita. Mrs. Berrie, could you tell me how your family came to the Pacific Northwest?
My dad came by the way of Canada, and then he worked in the lead mines in Mullins, Idaho, and other names he mentioned so often, but I can't think of them right now. Wallace, Idaho, and Mullins, and I really don't know how he wound up in Seattle, and that's where he met my mother. And my mother came through Ellis Island, and my dad came here in 1905, and my mother came in 1909. And on the way here, she worked for the Taft household. That was President Taft, but he was hardly home at any time. It seemed like he was overseas or something. She kind of looked after the two boys, which became senators, well known in the political life back there. Then after that, she worked for a while in Hamilton, Montana, and the gardener would come over there and would teach this Finnish girl Finnish. He'd say carrot and this and that and try to help her out with her English. And then years afterwards, I find out that this man is Mr. Crabbe, who is Don's brother's father-in-law. And they both lived in Juanita, but neither one were aware that the other was living here, so they didn't get in contact until after I married Don. And then I found out that he had been teaching my mother English way back in 1909. But my mother and Dad met in Seattle. I don't know too much about the circumstances. I know my brother was born in Seattle, whereas I was born in Juanita in a log cabin that my dad built. My brother was born in June 1911, and I was born October 31st, 1912 at Juanita, so I haven't really gotten very far away from home. We're still in Juanita, but we did. When I was in the second grade, my mother helped another lady run a boarding house in Ballard for 1 year, and the 4 years that I lived in Kirkland after I married Don are the only years that I have been absent from Juanita, and I am 80 years old now.
So your mom and dad bought their property in Juanita in what year?
1910.
In 1910. And do you have any recollection of who your dad bought the land from, or how he paid for the land?
He bought it from Fred Berg, and the contract, I have it somewhere in my grip over here, stated that he was to pay $500 in gold, and the place had a lot of tall timber, but my dad did not get the timber. They wanted the timber for themselves. And I don't know the reason my dad really moved out there, and my mother kind of wonders just why he didn't move over to that particular place.
Well, speaking of that particular place, could you give us, I'm looking at the 1910 Crolls map that you so kindly provided, and we also have access here to the Ruth Nelson map of Juanita. But could you tell us where? First of all, let's back up just a little bit, and could you give us your maiden name
Mabel Chertanen.
and your mother and father's names?
My mother's maiden name was Anna Sophie Guntinen, but she changed it to Koski when she came to America. And my dad's name was Peter Chertanen. Of course, my brother and I kind of changed that name around a little bit. We took out one I. It should really be pronounced Turtiainen. That's the Finnish way of pronouncing it. But we took out one I so it would be simpler for us in school.
And your brother's name was?
Armus.
Okay, so the four of you lived on the property your parents purchased that you were telling us about, and could you tell us where that property was located?
The present time, it's located near where Northeast 132nd meets Northeast 100, where the avenue meets the street, the 132nd and the street 132nd Avenue meet. But A.E. Griffiths owned that corner property. He owned a big lot there, and we owned a little strip that went back from 132nd Street. It would be about 134th Street in today's directions.
Can you tell us what your childhood recollections of what that property looked like at that time?
We lived down in the hollow part of it, down below but there was, you went up a big hillside, and that was flat country on the hillside. But I think my dad moved there because that would have been the easiest place to dig a well. When we moved up to the upper part, we had a well that was about 125 feet deep, but I think that's the reason why he built down there in that, they call it Furlock now, but Furlock used to be the railroad station when I was growing up there on Mud Lake or Lake Whittemire. And on the hillside, my dad planted a lot of fruit trees about 1910, and there are some there still, but they're in a jungle of woods, and it's kind of hard to see them. When the property was developed, they just developed the upper part. They did not develop the bottom part where I was born, and they left that as a green belt.
And how did your dad dig? Do you know how your dad dug that well, 125 feet deep back in those days?
Don, can you help me? How did my dad dig that well?
Well, I don't know whether they used a bucket or effectively.
This other Finnish fellow that lived there, Mr. Ekman, I remember him working on it, and they had these boards to keep it from crumbling down. And I think they got somebody in later years to drill down there, but when they first started it, they did it by hand. And of course it wasn't quite that deep then when they first started digging it.
Can you describe for us the log cabin home that you first lived in down in the hollow?
It wasn't very big. I think our main room was the big bedroom, and that would be our living room too. And then we had a kitchen, and then we had a little loft up there where my brother and I slept. And the kitchen had boards on, but I think I could see the ground through the boards. And there was a little place for your food alongside of it that just had a ground floor. That was all connected together, but it wasn't very big. But we didn't realize we were poor in those days. We had good times. We played pinochle when there wasn't anything else to do, and we didn't have lights or we didn't have anything, but we never realized we were poor.
So, so the cabin did not have electric lights.
No.
It had. Did you use lamps or some other means of heating?
Lamps and kerosene lamps.
And what was your father's occupation at that time?
When I was born, I'm not
Or
sure.
early memory of your childhood? Or what did your father do most of his life after moving to Juanita?
He did farming, and he worked out whenever he could get a job. He worked for the Stimson, down where the winery is now. I don't really know what he did, but that was when we moved up on the hill. I lived for 14 years in that little log cabin, and then when I was 14 we moved up in the hill, and at that time mainly he butchered cattle, and I think before that time too he had this meat wagon. He'd go around the neighborhood and sell meat. Sometimes I'd go along with him as a child because I was interested, and then he'd go and pick up calves and grow them and butcher them, and he'd go around the country, like down to Woodinville, and pick up calves. And we went to the market, I think ever since it started. We brought things, and he brought his beef down to the market too until they stopped allowing them to sell beef, the farmers from selling beef, but he sold beef down at the meat and at the market, at the public market.
This is the public market in Seattle?
Yes.
Would he take the ferry across the lake, or did he drive around the north end of the lake with his wagon?
The first few recollections, he took the ferry across the lake. Then later on, he drove around the lake. And my girlfriend, Adele Willette, who lived up there, and I would ride in back of the pickup to town, and we'd roam around town, my brother and I, and we'd go to the waterfront. And it was safe. First Avenue was safe, and we would have a good time. We were only maybe 7 or 8, but we were never molested or anything in it. And it was kind of fun riding in back of the pickup and going around Seattle back.
Did your father ever have any business with Harry Langdon and Langdon's store down in Juanita Junction?
I can remember my mother going through the woods. I see there's a railroad trail in Ruth Nelson's map. That's probably what she used when we were just little children. And my dad was in Alaska to get some groceries, just something. But I'm sure she wasn't dependent on just walking down there for the groceries, because the neighbors all helped each other in those days. I know the Frisk family was real good to us, and the A.E. Griffiths family was good, and neighbor helped neighbor in those days.
What language was spoken in your home in those days?
We spoke Finnish at home, and my mother wouldn't teach me her broken English because she thought I should learn it right to begin with, and then I wouldn't have to undo the broken English part of it. And my brother and I never had any problems in school with our English or otherwise.
What are your recollections of your mother's activity when you were a youngster? What was while your father was working in his meat business and doing the farming? What kinds of things was your mother doing?
She was, for one thing, she made the soap that she washed the clothes with from the lard that we got from the beef. And she made head cheese from the beef, and she separated the cream. I think she did the milking because she didn't think my dad did it clean enough. The Finnish women didn't think the men were clean enough. They were. I noticed how clean they were when we took a trip to Finland, and we visited with relatives there in 1965, and it took me back to my childhood. It was just they were doing things in 65 the way that my folks were doing it in the 1920s.
Okay.
And of course there was the ironing and the washing and scrubbing by and that. And of course in those days we had to starch our clothes, and they had to be just perfect, even though we didn't have the equipment or the time, but they had to be done right. And when we were just little kids, she saw to it that we were clean, even though they didn't have that well yet, and they carried the water for about a half a mile from Mr. Ekman's place. She would give us kids a bath twice a day, and then I had to take a sauna, which my dad had built on the hillside. I had to do that up until age 14, and then when I didn't have any say in the matter what was what in those days. But when I got to be 14, where they said that I could or could not, and so I didn't really want to take any more saunas.
And how many Finnish families were in the immediate area of your family property up there?
There was only the one man, Mr. Ekman.
And did your mom and dad, or just your dad, have contact with the other Finns in the Finn Hill area?
My dad always went to their doings. He belonged to the club on Finn Hill. I don't recall that he belonged to the one. I understood there was one on the lake shore, but he always belonged to the one up on the hillside. But my mother was too busy with all these doings that she didn't go as often, maybe just once in a while. She didn't go very often to that. But he was right in the midst of things all the time, in the Finnish doings. And then there was another, we would go to Seattle sometimes to finish plays. They would put on plays at Madison Park, and maybe on a Saturday night we'd go over there to the doings at Madison, up on Madison Hill. There was a Finnish hall up there.
Do you know what the name of the Finnish club on Finn Hill was?
No, I don't.
Do you know where it was located on the hill? Do you have any idea of the cross streets or what's there today?
It's a housing development now. I know where it's located, but I can't tell you the street. It's southwest of the grade school up there. It was on the hill, wind up Finn Hill, and then you went north, and then you took a jog west, and it was right there on that corner.
Right near the grade school? Where the grade school is today?
Oh, within a mile, I would say.
Well, maybe we can look at a map later and refresh that. Do you remember what kinds of activities the Finn Club and the Finn community was involved in at that time, that your father was involved in, the kinds of things they did?
Not too well because my brother and I didn't go there. We were more involved in what was going on in our school and the community down here at Juanita and the clubhouse doings and the school doings. So we didn't go as often. So I know they had dancing and socials and that's about all I know.
You mentioned there was a railroad station at that time called Furlock near Lake Wittenmeyer. Can you describe that railroad station? What was that like?
It was just a stop in where the railroad where the train stopped. That was about all it amounted to. Sometimes my dad would carry those big crates of eggs. I don't know if you remember where they were divided and they had this, I don't know how many dozen, do under his arm, carry it down to Furlock, take the train, go to Kirkland, then take the ferry and take it to the market.
And do you remember any kind of a shingle mill on Lake Wittenmeyer?
No, that does not ring a bell with me.
And what about your neighbors up in the area there? The people in your that were more in your life around where you lived. What are your recollections of some of the neighbors in the area? Well, you had told me there was a black bachelor named Mr. Walker who lived on the shore of Lake Wittenmeyer at that time, on the eastern shore.
Yes, I faintly recall what he looked like. We'd go through his place and go ice skating on Lake Wittenmeyer. I faintly recall what he looks like. And then we had the other colored man living not too far from us. He had moved into Mr. Reeby's place. There were a group of bachelors, it seemed like, in that neighborhood. My dad would look in on them and see that nothing had happened to them and that they had milk or eggs, and then they would come and help us out. Mr. Reeby was one of them that helped us. He'd babysit. Well, my brother and I'd stay home sometimes from the market, but my folks didn't leave us by ourselves, as Mr. Reeby would come and do it. And I can remember he liked to fry bread, raw potatoes in grease, and they were really good. It doesn't sound good, but they were good. The raw fried potatoes that he would cook for us.
Now, where did Mr. Reevy live?
What is 124th Avenue now, down. They call it the
Sanitarium Road?
No, City Light, where the City Light crossed up there, where on the road where Kingsgate Library is now, but it wasn't as far as the Kingsgate Library, but on that road.
And what did he do for a living?
I know he was a carpenter because he helped build the house that we moved into. It was supposed to have been a chicken house eventually, but we lived there at least I lived there until I was 21 years old, from the age of 14 to 21 years old, and he helped build that, so I think he was a carpenter by trade. And then after I don't know whether he passed away or what, Mr. Abel moved in there, and he was the other colored man that lived in the neighborhood. And he was a nice man too. I remember after I got married, I had a certain problem, physical problem, and he recommended a doctor, and we went to the white doctor that he had recommended, so we got along real well with our colored neighbors.
What did he do for a living?
I don't recall. I don't know.
And what of your other neighbors in the area there growing up?
There was Mr. Hoiby, who's the uncle to Al Flaidland. I think you read about Al Flaidland in Ruth Nelson's map and story.
Would this be L.K. Hoiby?
Yeah, he was the uncle to Al Flaidland. And I remember playing with the Flaidland's daughter when I was young. And then there was Mr. Tinkham. They call it Tinkham's Hill at that time. And going to his house and I recall his parrots that he had. That was quite a novelty for us in those days.
Now, where would Tinkham Hill be by today's description of the land?
On 132nd Avenue Northeast, going south. Before you get to where you go, you have to have your cars tested for
the emissions?
Yes, that hill there where the cars are tested for emissions.
And what did Mr. Tinkham do? Do you remember?
No. Then there was Esther's, who had raspberries. I used to pick raspberries for them. And I earned enough money for my first permanent from picking raspberries. And Mrs. Williams lived with them. They were sisters. Mrs. Esther were sisters. Mrs. Williams was a teacher. And then there was Holt's. When I was really little, I used to pick strawberries for them. And it didn't hurt us kids to pick strawberries. Nowadays, they don't let children go out and pick strawberries.
And this was the Holt family?
Yes.
And they lived just directly north of your parents' property?
Right. And then next to them was a family of Caissons. They also raised strawberries, but I didn't work for them. And then going east, where is it Kayakum School? Is that what they call it?
Kamiakin?
Kamiakin. Right across the street was another Caisson, and he grew prunes. So we called one prune Caisson, and the other one was strawberry Caisson. And closer to our place was Willetts and Winters, who both raised chickens. And those ladies really were busy, kept busy at that, not only doing all the household chores that was to be done, but they helped with their chickens, and cleaning eggs and doing that. I knew Adele Willett real well. I still am in touch with her. She lives in the Tri-Cities now. And then Browns lived across the road from Winters. Browns were the ones that grew bees.
Now, where did the Winters family live?
Just south of Fredberg. I meant west of Fredberg. We got from Fredberg. First Griffiths, Fredberg, and then Winters, and then Willett, down on 132nd Street. And across from Winters was the Browns, who raised Chester Brown, Chester and Mrs. Brown, who raised bees. And Mrs. Brown just passed away lately. She was 104 years old. And they had a son they had 3 boys, but the youngest son was taken prisoner of war by the Japs on day 1, and he was held prisoner of the Japs for the whole duration of World War II.
But he lived and came home?
Yeah, he came home. He's had a few problems since then, so, but I visited him down, his mother was at a nursing home in Auburn. He lived right nearby her there because of the problems that he had, that came from the treatment he got from the Japs.
And he lives, where does he live now?
In Auburn.
Down in Auburn. And what was his name?
Harold.
So his mother just passed away, and they lived quite near you here?
Yes, not too far. And above them was the Blakelands. I remember the Blakelands had a team of horses, and my brother's, that was his ambition, was to be a teamster when he grew up. So we didn't own any horses. We weren't quite that wealthy. And so he borrowed their team once, and they came and got away from him, and they just stopped on the brink of that hill where we lived.
And we are on tape number 1, side 2 of our interview with Mabel Berrie. And you were saying, Mrs. Berrie?
About Harold Brown being a prisoner of war for the duration of World War II. And then above the Browns, that's just across the street from Fred Berg's, that was Blakeland's. I was telling you about the horses and
right,
and the close call we had there. That land that my dad bought, the upper part, the level part, was full of stumps after they had cut off all the trees, and I can remember all the blasting that went. I'd go and stuff my ears and go and hide somewhere when they would blast all those stumps out.
So they were using dynamite to
Yes.
clear the stumps from the land to make it more agriculturally
Yes.
suitable?
Yes, and then we grew hay on it after it was suitable. Why? Then he grew hay for the cattle.
Were those stumps large virgin growth stumps, or were they perhaps smaller
No,
stumps?
they were big stumps,
They were big stuff.
big ones.
Did
So I think they were virgin growth.
The long roots that run way out like that.
and these were mostly hemlock and Doug fir?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you got the feeling then, it sounds like, and maybe Mr. Berrie can help us with this, that maybe that was the first time that property had been logged by
Yes.
white people, by
Yes.
regular.
Yes.
Sure.
So was much of this area up here virgin growth trees and woods? Was it that thick old woods just then being logged, or was your parents' property one of the last sections to be logged off?
I wouldn't know because,
Maybe that was a bad way to ask the question. Were there a lot of big trees still standing when you were a young kid, or had it been cleared quite a bit in this area
I think
up
it
here?
had been cleared. It had been cleared.
And could you tell us again what the company was that retained the timber rights to the land and came in and logged it? Do you remember who logged it?
No, I might have it been.
Could that have been the Schaefer brothers or Wooden or?
I don't know. I could have it in some of my, like the deeds to the land or something, but
Okay,
right
well, we
now
can
I
check
can't.
that later if you want. But anyway, you were telling us some good stories about the other neighbors and things that you remember around there, and you had just finished telling you remembered hearing the blasting the stumps out, and you covered your ears so loud.
And I seem to jump from this age to that age, but that's the way I remember things. Then there, down the street on 132nd was Mickelson's. Helen Mickelson is still alive. She lives here in Juanita. You see it on the map where...
Yeah, we can see that right here on the Ruth Nelson map. It's designated Mickelson, Barden.
Yes.
And it's just east of the, or pardon me, just west of the Ed Langdon property here, kind of kitty corner from your homestead, kind of kitty corner to the southwest. Would be up above what is now called the Totem Lake Mall area, maybe around where Evergreen Hospital is.
No, not quite that. It's close to it, but not quite that far, because where the Evergreen Hospital is, that used to be Snickers Cherry Farm.
I see.
And Totem Lake, not where it was marshy, was Vic and Margaret Johnson's farm. I think it was a dairy. Was it a dairy farm down Vic and Johnson's farm?
I think that's probably what it was.
And Vic Johnson just passed away within the last year.
So this was further up, just right off the road, actually, further up from the Evergreen Hospital.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at the Nelson map now, and here's the Snickers Cherry Orchard and Lake Wittenmeyer. So the Mickelson
was on, where's the 132nd?
would be right.
Well, they were right here on the road, on the main road. See, and they were down here on the main road.
Right across from the Blakelands, it looks like, from the map.
Oh, the Blakelands lived there too. Blakelands had lived here too. And LaRue's, they were connected together, was related somehow. It seems like everybody was related to somebody or another in those days. But they were on, Mickelson's were right there on 132nd Street. And then across the street from Mickelson's, just a little farther west, was Mrs. Ellman. And when we came home from school, we used to show her our report cards because she would give us candy. They were candy salesman people. But I think what she actually wanted to know was to get the news of the neighborhood. We kids would tell everything we knew. So, but that was always a highlight, to stop in there and show us how we were doing in school. And coming farther on down the road, the first hill on 132nd, that we called Hardick's Hill, and the teachers used to room and board there. And on Friday nights, they wouldn't come back to there they go into Seattle or wherever, and they would let me bring their lunch buckets up back to Hardick's. And I really thought I was a privileged character when they would let me trust me with their lunch buckets to bring up there.
And back in those days, were those real buckets, like lard pails and things? Or
Yes, yeah.
When they said bucket, they meant bucket.
Yes, it was metal.
So can you kind of give us a description? You know, since those days, we've had 405 kind of cut through that area.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we're talking about, can you fill in some blanks for us as to what that sort of looked like around there, around Totem Lake, and where 405 went in?
Totem Lake, I didn't get down there only to Ice Gate, but where 405 came in, there was a creek running through, and when we'd come home from school, there we would go picking Johnny Jump-Ups and whatever the trilliums, and we little kids would be let out 2 hours before the 8th graders would, say the first and second graders would be let out 2 hours earlier so that they could get home in time. Well, these 8th graders would catch up with us because we had so much fun coming home and investigating the wildlife. on the way, the wild flora on the way home.
Was where 405 went in now, of course, it's all level through there. Was that naturally kind of a flattened little valley-ish area, or was it, or did it look differently at that time?
Well, it was kind of like that.
Was it just pasture
Well,
type?
there was Cross family lived right there on the hillside as you start up to Kingsgate on the road. There was a family by the name of Cross, and towards 405, a family by the name of Murray lived there, and then on the west side down here, Bartlings lived down the road. And where the fire station is, it was a family of Reeds. That was the fellow we were telling you about. There was, when we walked up and down the street, there were only about 2 cars during the daytime because there wasn't much traffic. And he only had one eye, and this other man only had one eye. And they would offer us a ride home, but we didn't know whether we should, so we didn't accept the ride home. Because
One question I would have is, here on the Ruth Nelson map, they show this road coming off of 132nd and kind of looping around in back now. You see the road I'm pointing at? Right here now, running right along through the Johnson property here. You see that?
or you're going.
We're now, yeah,
you're
we're now
going south.
we're now moving south.
Yeah.
Do you remember this road coming down through here?
I didn't travel that too much.
I'm wondering if this road is, on the Nelson map, follows roughly the lines of where Totem Lake Boulevard is now today, where it winds around down past Shucks. Is that about where that road was, or was that road in a different spot?
That road was a little bit west of where the well, maybe a block or 2 or 3
So
west, or just a block, almost. It comes out. Well, I couldn't.
I'm just wondering if they turned this road, if it's the one that's Totem Lake Boulevard now, because you know Totem Lake Boulevard runs parallel to 405 roughly. You know, where you get 405 running up through here now. And this road is over and kind of winds down.
It's west of 405.
So, okay.
405 west, just parallel but west.
So you say you didn't really get down into this area very often?
No, but Don came from Kirkland, and this was just a little gravel road, you know, like those pictures I showed you around Kirkland. It was just he'd drive over here and go duck hunting and he remembers that part of the country better than I do.
Okay, well, we'll ask him about that later. Okay, so now you had told me too that there was a further down your road here, 132nd, as you get closer to the intersection at 100. You said there had been a sanitarium up along here, and a Jewish family had lived here, or
Jewish family lived there before the sanitarium, which is the rehab center now, had lived there, and that was the show place of Juanita. Mr. Marks would gather trees from all around the world, and some of the trees that are at the Arboretum, they came over to his place for starts from his place, and he had a lovely pond there where Arnold Marks used to have a boat. It was one of the UW boats, or big or what, but he used to roll around into that little pond that they had made, and it was a show place as far as garden goes in Juanita. And now when Arnold comes home for the reunions, he came up there and he felt so bad his wife wouldn't let him go back a second time to see the place that it's not like it was at all.
And what is that place today?
What do you call that? The rehab center there.
The Alcinus, or
Yeah.
care unit
Yes.
hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and they also have the Fairfax
Yes.
mental hospital. Was that all the Marks property
Yes.
in that section? Now, is that listed here on the Nelson map? Is this where the Hartig?
Hardig was where is this Northeast 32nd?
Yeah, this is 132nd.
No, she has Shuley. See, her map only goes to 1918, and this she has Shuley about there. And this was after 1918 that they came over here. Arnold was 6 years old or so, and he's my age now. So that, if I was born in 1912, at 6, be about 1918 or... See, and her map only said it went to 1918, so it was... So that shortly after where her map ends, they moved in there. By the creek, where the creek is. Does it show the creek?
Yeah, we can see the creek going through right there.
What is it?
So that's a good time reference too. That pins it down. We know that. Now, what did Mr. Marks? Was he what was his job? Was he a business owner?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, continuing down the road in those days, on your way down 132nd to where it intersects with 100th, we see there was a gravel hill here. Do you have any remembrances of the gravel pit activities in those days?
No, but Don, my husband, Don, where did you go? He knew more about it. My brother used to talk about it, but I wasn't interested in the things that the boys were interested in. They knew more.
Okay,
about
well
it.
we'll cover that later with Mr. Berrie. The Modern Woodmen of America Hall is here on the corner. Do you have any recollections of that structure?
Yes, they used to, from grade school, we'd go and play basketball. That was where we played basketball at that time.
And
I'm not sure that was where the church that burnt down. The community church now was built, but I'm not...
Is that building still standing? The Modern Woodman Hall?
No.
That's not the Woodman Hall that was there in the corner?
No. The building they moved for the parsonage was Puget Sound's home for was the superintendent or something on Wayne. And John Gates' wife was brought up in that house. And one of the Labars, the Labar children, was born in that house when it was in Wayne, and then it was moved as a parsonage here to the Juanita Church.
Is that the same Labar family that operated a business in downtown Kirkland?
He was connected with Puget Sound. I don't know, but she is John Gates's wife or widow now, and I think everybody knows who John Gates was.
Well, as we continue down 132nd, and we get to the intersection of 132nd and 100th, and at the southwestern corner was the Juanita Elementary School building. Do you have any memories or recollections of the Juanita Elementary?
Many. I spent 8 years there, and they were happy memories too. I remember the operettas we had. And I don't know whether you should tell tales out of school here or not, should you? Margaret Bassett, who comes to our things, she was Cinderella, and Anderson, or he lived in that neighborhood where you're doing it. I can't think of names. I should have had them written down before. Well, he was the prince, and he kissed her on the mouth. And my friend, Ruth Weaver, who lived up where you live now, she thought that was her special boyfriend, and she said he should not have done that, or Margaret should not have let him do that. So she resented Margaret to this. She's gone, but to this day, I haven't told Margaret about this when I meet her, but it's little things like that. I remember our operettas, we made kimonos for that well-known Japanese operetta, and we made the kimonos in home ec class, and then the fairs that Ed Nelson and Ed Watson used to conduct, that was the social life I remember.
What year did you begin at Juanita Elementary School? About?
Well, I graduated in 24, so...
You've been there 8 years?
Yes.
So 1916?
I couldn't, because I wouldn't have been that old. Or was it 1927? I think it was 1927 that we graduated from the grade school. I went into high school and we graduated 31.
So you started in 1919?
Yes.
And did you speak English when you began at Juanita Elementary School?
No, I didn't speak English, and neither did my brother. My mother started both of us at the same, he was a year and a half older at the same time, but he hadn't been there very long before he skipped a grade and went where he should have been a grade ahead of me, so, but we didn't know English. We didn't speak, either one of us.
Did Juanita Elementary School at that time employ a vigorous bilingual education program like they do in these days?
We never heard of such a thing.
How did you learn English?
I don't know. I just went to school and picked it up, I guess.
So it doesn't sound like you had a terribly traumatic or self-esteem reducing experience because you spoke a foreign language when you began elementary school.
Not at all, but I wasn't the only one, because there were several from Big Fin Hill that came down, and they were in the same boat, most of them, so I don't remember talking to them either.
Did very many of the Finnish children, despite the fact that they didn't speak English originally, go on to pursue academic honors or excellence in school despite the language barrier initially?
There were many that did. There were many, like Adolf Tamminen. He was the state championship in oratory, I think, when he went to high school. And this Hilda Wilson, she was secretary to Mr. Vandivander at Ballard High School. Mr. Vandivander was one of our superintendent of schools in later year, and there were many of them up there that went on to. That wasn't any problem at all that we didn't speak English when we went to school.
And who were some of your classmates in your days at One Elementary School that you have memories of?
I remember Lillian Ombrick, Ombrick family was one of the pioneers. They were off in the Woodenville cutoff road. I would go and visit her, and she was a Norwegian background, but her parents must have known English because they didn't teach her Norwegian. She wished she had known Norwegian now because she wanted to go and visit Norway. But she said when her parents left Norway, they said, we've left that country behind. We're going to take on the culture of this new land they were at, and they didn't want their children speaking Norwegian. So she never spoke Norwegian. And I'm still in contact with her. She lives in Beaverton, Oregon right now. And we'd walk home and go through the woods, and there were baskets that lived up, like Margaret. She lived up in the woods, and we'd walk through the woods from over there and visit back and forth. I'd stay overnight. That was Ombrick's Dairy. Do you see Ombrick's Dairy up there? Yeah. And then we'd go through the woods. Where am I?
There's your property here.
Right.
We're looking at the Nelson map again. She's drawing a straight line between her family property and the Ombrick Dairy.
Yeah, and the Bassets lived up here where Kingsgate is. And sometimes if we overstayed our leave, it was kind of scary coming home through the woods when it got dark. We just walked everywhere. Lillian and I, when we grew up, when I was about 19, we walked clear around the valley, down the Hollywood, and where the flower place has their greenhouses. You know what I mean. And up 124th Street. We started out after supper and got home about 11 o'clock at night. We walked around there. Everything was safe in those days. It isn't like nowadays. And if anybody came to the door and they needed food or anything, our parents always gave it to them. His mother would do that, make a sandwich or a meal for somebody that said they didn't have, and you didn't have to worry about them robbing you or taking your life or anything like you do nowadays. They honestly needed the food or something, and everybody used to share.
Would these be drifters that were drifting through town?
Yes, uh-huh.
Did they walk the roads, or did they ride the rails on the Northern Pacific Line, or do you know where they came from? Just on foot, or?
Do you know where they came down?
Oh, some of them came down the railroad. That was the only way to cut through there, you know. So there was quite a few. I think, I don't know for sure, nobody's told me, but I think that there was, they followed the tramp, they weren't tramps or that, but they were
Drifters, like he said.
Hobo.
yeah, hobos and some, but there wasn't, I don't remember that there was too many walking by themselves.
Now, was this before the Depression? Was this in the 20s? Or was this after the Depression had started, if we count the Depression as starting in 1929?
Before the Depression.
Before the Depression.
Were times hard for people around here before the official Depression started in 1929, or how were times in the 20s here for most people, would you say?
Well, most people had had a cow well, that was a cow and then milk and that was,
You're thinking of Depression days. That's what kept us going was my folks' cows and milk. That was the Depression days. That was 1934 after we got married. Yeah. But before that, well, it seemed like everybody worked at something. But there had been a depression too at that. Wasn't there a 1919 depression? It seemed like all around the country was that. So, like I said, everybody was in the same boat, and we really didn't notice it if our clothes weren't up to date or what have you. Some people were better off. My friend Lillian, she was better off than we were because they owned a Buick car and they had the big dairy over there, so she was better off than we were.
Did most of your neighbors tend to work and do jobs and things either on their land or very near their home, as opposed to, say, going into Kirkland every day?
Yeah, most of them did.
So it was kind of a little more self-sufficiency
Yes.
than being tied to the jobs in town.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I didn't mean to get you off the topic. You were covering some of your recollections of your classmates and days at Winneed Elementary School.
Well, in that, and Doris too. I knew her.
And this would be Doris Forbes Beecher?
Yes. We were discussing the other day where I met Don. I said at the dance hall down there, and she still kids me to this day because she was with me at the time. I said, he seems to be like kind of a nice sort of a guy or something like that. Well, she still kids me about that.
And this was at the old Juanita Park
Yes.
Dance Pavilion where
Yes.
the Treasure House and Representative
Yes.
Building are today in Juanita Bay.
And then Alma Larson lived down the road. She was a good friend of mine. Elizabeth Nelson, you heard of them, haven't you? Lawrence Nelson, who was lost in flying from Eastern Washington over the pass. You've heard that story, haven't you?
No.
The one up from the theater, what was auto? Who owned the outer place up from the theater, Don?
I gotta find my son. He said it to me,
Finger Lake.
I think the development has got slush down there. Yeah. Just like Juanita Beach was so nice, but when they started developing, and I think Oskins and Ombrigs were the first places that were sold for development, and the mud started to come down the creek was when it started to spoil that sandy beach that was down there. That beautiful sandy beach we used to. That's where I learned to swim on water wings when I was 7 years old.
Is that Juanita Beach?
Uh-huh.
And then you said too that you had recollections of the Johnson farm there, and they had they had cows there. Did you say? And this is tape 2, side 2 of our interview with Mrs. Berrie, and she was just commenting, making some final comments on the Johnson property that is by today's Totem Lake Mall area.
It was just that it's located. That was a farm there, and then the Snickers was near the hospital up there. Snickers cherry farm, I believe they had cherries, but I'm not too sure what Johnson's, that I didn't take that road down there for some reason or another, but,
And did you know the Wittenmeyers?
no, but I heard of them. Again, I don't know whether I should tell the story or not.
It's part of history.
We hear he was he the county treasurer? And he absconded with the money that.
He was, I forgot. I don't remember what. There was something, it wasn't.
Right, something that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the tale that I had heard.
Did he stay living on that property?
No,
or-
I think he left the country.
Didn't they have children that were in the area? And
I don't know. We didn't know any more about it than that.
do you remember about when that happened? About what year?
In the clock now. I don't know. I can't put a time on
No, we can't.
Interesting. And while we're looking at the Nelson map here, it says off the NP Railroad, not far from the Tinkham Hill, it says a person lived here just named the Frenchman. That looked kind of intriguing. Do you know who that person was, or
No,
anybody named the Frenchman living down there?
no. Is that near Five Corners?
Five Corners would be right
Oh.
here, and so you come down Slater, and then turns around. See, here's Tinkham Hill.
Uh-huh. No, I didn't know anything about that. Because at Five Corners here, the one who puts out our Golden Grads newsletter, she had lived there. Rosemary Evans Hill, and we get quite a few comments in our newsletter about that time.
And of course, you're talking about the Golden Grads of the Kirkland High School
Yes.
group to which you both belong. And she lived in the Five Corners area up here.
Yes. And they bought from Joe Galanese, and it was quite an interesting story she wrote in our Golden Grads newsletter. And then there was Ina Spies, and they went to high school. So I don't know them, but like I told you about Hugo Barden, he lived there in Nicholson's place, and he went to school on the Willows Road. The building is still standing there.
Right, at Physio Control nowadays. Physio Control is off Willows Road.
Well, Don said that he pointed out a building. He says, "Well, that's the schoolhouse that Hugo went to. It wouldn't be taken over with any other development."
Oh, the Physio Control left the old buildings in place there off Willows.
Oh.
They painted them red.
I haven't been
This,
there either.
he pointed it out and said that
Is it right off the road? Just
right on the road.
on the. I mean, you can see it when you're on
Yes.
Willows Road. If you're heading towards Redmond, it's on your right-hand side.
No, it's towards Redmond. Yeah, towards Redmond. It'd be on the right-hand side. We were coming the other way, and it
So
was
it was
on
on
your
the
left-hand side up here, kind of.
Did you tell me you knew some of the Voris kids?
I think my brother did. I didn't know him, but my brother knew him because when he came to take the census once, he told me, "Oh, you're the sister that always had the car when your brother wanted it." My brother could have told you a lot more stories than this, but he's been gone 10, 12 years now, so he's not here. And you just, if you don't jot things down when you think about it, it's gone. His mother used to tell us so many stories, and we didn't jot them down.
Well, that's okay. But what we'll do now then, if you don't have anything else, is we'll shut it down for the moment. But certainly, if anything else comes to you, we can always just add that on. Did you have anything else that you had on your mind? Well, of course, we'll thank you very much. We'll go ahead and shut it down, and if something else comes to you, we'll get that on there.
All right.